How's it going, ladies and gentlemen? Hello and welcome to or welcome back to Mystery Inc. My name is Richie, and today I just wanted to briefly talk to you guys about the five books from my childhood. I say five books, it includes a couple of book series, but specifically five books from my childhood that made me the reader that I am today. Now, the first one here is not going to be a surprise. Actually, a few of these shouldn't be a surprise if you've been following the channel for a little while. If you're new to the channel, then maybe they'll all be a surprise. But the first book was The Boxcar Children. Now, I don't know 100% for sure that this was the first book of these that I read, but based on the age level of the series, I believe that this was the first book in this list. I remember picking this up when I was a youngster. I was always obsessed with trains. My dad had model trains from when he was younger, and we used to get them out on this little 4x8 board that we would put up on the dining room table every once in a while and run trains around. So I was obsessed with anything train related. I grew up watching Tom's the Tank Engine stuff on TV. And so when I read this, it really inspired my imagination, the adventure with the kids and living in the boxcar and just everything with it. And I absolutely love this book. I know that I read a few other books in the series when I was younger. I don't really remember them as much. I've gone back and read one or two of those so far as an adult. But yeah, really, this first book was a big inspiration in getting me to read because I remember when I was quite young, I didn't want to read at all. My mom literally had to bribe me with Beanie Baby toys to get me to read like those really simple, like, 10 to 20 page, like children's starting reading books. And it really wasn't until I think late in grade school when I read stuff like this and the next couple books on the list when I really got interested in reading and really fell in love with it. The next book we have here is one that I've definitely not talked about at all on this channel. It was the first book I read that was kind of spooky-ish, more of like a time travel adventure than a ghost story per se, but that is The 13th Floor here by Sid Fleischman. Is that how you pronounce that? I remember getting this at a Scholastic Book Fair in 1997. This was before my family had moved to Arizona. We were still living back in Illinois, and I don't remember exactly why, but this book just really stood out to me. I always loved the number 13. Everybody else thought it was unlucky, so I decided that it was going to be my lucky number, and I picked 13 and said, I don't believe in superstition. I'm gonna defy everything that says. I love the number 13, so I picked this up. It's a ghost story, quote unquote, and I read it and I absolutely loved it. I went back and reread it a couple of years ago, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I don't remember exactly when, and, it was still fun. It wasn't quite as good as I remember, but I just remember this was the first spooky-esque story, though, that I got into and I really enjoyed. The next book that really inspired my love of reading was not a scary book again. Well, I mean, I guess it has some elements that are pretty scary, but it's much more of an adventure book, and I remember this was a book that we were assigned to read in, oh, was it 4th grade? Maybe 5th grade? I don't remember. Somewhere in between 4th and 6th grade, and that was Hatchet by Gary Paulson. And this book just it was just so much fun, such an adventure book, survival out in the wild story. Just just such a great read, and I remember just absolutely falling in love with it, and it just made me want to just pick up more books and read. And eventually that led me to the sequel, Brian's Winter, which was my favorite of, I guess it was a trilogy. There were, well, no, I guess there's four books because there's The River, which is one that takes place in an alternate timeline from Brian's Winter. Brian's Winter was technically the third book, and this was an alternate timeline where if Brian hadn't gotten rescued in the first book like he did, then this would have happened. But in the first book, he did get rescued, and then the river happened. But then he went back and read this as a what if, and this was my favorite by far, like I said, of the series. But it's that adventure of like being out in the wilderness, surviving on your own, ha- you know, just having like a hatchet tool. My dad actually ended up buying me a hatchet because I love this so much. So I had my own hatchet and I would go out in the backyard and pretend that I was Brian and stuff, living out in the wilderness and stuff. But yeah, this also made me just like want to read. It gave me a thirst for reading. And then fast forward a couple of years to when I was 9, back in 2000. And my grandmother brought me a present when she came out to visit one year. It was not yeah, my grandfather would have been there too. He was still alive at that time, but my grandparents came out to visit. My grandmother bought me a present, and that was a six-book box set of Goosebumps. Obviously, I've talked a lot about Goosebumps on this channel. I'm reading through all the books that I never read as a kid. Everything after Series 2000, actually including Series 2000, and give yourself Goosebumps. But these first six, obviously, like inspired my love of reading, especially like, spooky ghost stories and stuff like this. All of them were great, but my favorite was definitely Welcome to Dead House. This book, yeah, it inspired my imagination. It really gave me a thirst for reading. I mean, not just specifically this genre, but in general. Absolutely just could not put these down. I would go to my local used bookstore, and I was always trying to get a hold of other things to trade in to get trade credits so I could get more Goosebumps books. And I remember at one point I had, I think, close to 50 of them, maybe a little bit more than 50 as a kid. I never owned all 62 until recently, but yeah, Goosebumps was just such a big part of my childhood and part of my reading journey as a whole. And then fast forward a bit to kind of the end of that youthful era, moving into middle school, and then maybe just right at the beginning of high school. And that is when I picked up my first like real thicker book series, and that was Redwall. This book really, really got my um, what am I trying to say? Just really inspired me to love reading, and it got me into a lot of like fantasy fiction reading too. I read anything I could find that was similar with animals, anything dragon themed. I was absolutely in love with. I read probably I don't even know 10, 20 different series, all dragon focused that had 10, 20 books each. Crazy stuff like that. But yeah, specifically Redwall, the first book, the whole series was great, obviously. I think my favorite was actually Martin the Warrior, which is kind of an origin story of um, like the famous legendary character that's talked about a lot in Redwall. Yeah, I remember reading the first time that I picked up the first book and I read it, and it just like imagining the world and all these like cool little animals in this like medieval kingdom and stuff. It was just so cool. And yeah, so that is gonna wrap it up. That's a short overview of the 5 books slash book series that really inspired my love of reading as a kid and moving into adulthood. So yeah, have you read any of these books? Obviously, if you're watching this channel, you've probably read some Goosebumps at least. Are you familiar with any of the other book series? What's your favorite from among them? What books inspired you to want to read as a kid? Let me know. I'd like to know. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. We'll catch you next time. God bless you. Have a great day.